Honored to have Debbi speaking with us tonight. And Debbi brings really a wealth of information to our meeting and sharing with us. So Debbi Della Porta serves as a senior communication advisor to the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. She supports the Sisters of Mercy's mission, vision, and values by facilitating communication projects and serving as an advisor to the Institute Communication Office. Prior to this position, she was the Institute's Director of External Communications for 2.5 years and the Director of Communications for the Sisters of Mercy in Eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the New York area for 16 years. Along the way, she has handled crisis communications regarding church issues such as the apostolic visit, same-sex marriage, the closing of 4 schools, potential strikes, organizational changes, and controversial sales of properties. So, Debbi, thank you again for sharing your expertise with us this evening.
Oh, sure. Okay, as this first slide so dramatically indicates, any of the case studies that I talk about today are real, but the names and details have been changed. My focus is not on the crisis itself, but on the communication that is necessary when a crisis happens. The first question is, are you ready in case a crisis happens at your school? Hopefully today I will give you some concrete information that will be helpful in case it does. Any one of us can be involved in a crisis situation. I was invited today to share with you the communications around some of crisis situations at Mercy schools in the past. Later, I will ask you to share some of the communications you needed when a crisis arose at your school. And at the end of the presentation, I will give you the opportunity to ask questions and have a conversation about crisis. Next, I want to be clear about what I mean by a crisis. According to the dictionary, a crisis is a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger, such as the current political crisis. A time when a difficult or important decision must be made, such as a crisis point in history. In the examples that I give you today, you will see that during these challenging times, your board and/or school administration need to sometimes make very difficult decisions. The phrase grace under fire refers to someone who can remain calm, cool, and collected, even in stressful situations. Others said it can be related to grace under pressure, which was Ernest Hemingway's definition of courage. One of the finest measures of the human soul is the capacity to maintain grace under fire. Most individuals who have distinguished themselves in rising above the chaos, evil, and fear spinning around them speak of having received inner strength from outside their own interior resources. Perhaps it is the Holy Spirit. This strength allowed them to rise above situations of a stressful condition, to respond compassionately, to think clearly, and to ultimately display the very best in character. Hopefully today, I will help you learn to do that in a crisis situation. It's a quiet Monday morning. Life seems calm at your Mercy-sponsored school. You get settled in your office and open your email. You see an email from an unfamiliar name. You look at the subject line and it says, irate neighbors. A group of concerned citizens have started a petition on change.org to fight your proposed new athletic field on your school property. They want to make that land a national landmark. Then you notice your office phone has blinking red lights indicating voice messages. You hit playback and you have 10 messages, and none of them are from members of your school community. One is a reporter from one of the local newspapers. He wants a comment or a statement from you about the neighborhood situation. Another is from a local politician who is also curious about the neighbor's concerns. You wonder who put them through to your extension. And the last message is from the bishop of the diocese where your school is located. If you are a principal or a head of school, you know what to do. You call your communications director if you are fortunate enough to have one. You also call the person who handles the properties in your school. The three of you meet in person, if possible, to discuss the situation. The fun has begun. When you sponsor more than 55 different schools in 6 different countries and 1 U.S. territory, things happen. In the former Mid-Atlantic community of the Sisters of Mercy, as Susan mentioned, I was their director of communication for 16 years. We had our fair share of crises, including an apostolic visit and 4 school closings. First of all, let me give you some background about the Sisters of Mercy. As of today, there are 1,787 sisters in the Institute in 38 states and 10 countries, predominantly in the United States. And as some of you may know, the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy was formed in 1991 when 25 regional communities or provinces joined together. The Sisters of Mercy established Mercy Education in 2017 to ensure their school's educational mission into the future. The Sisters of Mercy sponsor all the schools in the Mercy education system. This means that they make sure that these educational ministries are identified within the mission of the Catholic Church and are faithful to the charism, mission, and core values of the Sisters of Mercy. In July of 2022, the Mercy Board of Education developed guidelines for member schools to use as part of their crisis communication planning. These guidelines assure that all Mercy schools, sponsored, co-sponsored, and affiliated, live out their Catholic identity through the lens of the Mercy tradition and charism. These guidelines, which are available from your Mercy Education Liaison, specify the communications chain in case of a crisis. They specify how to formally communicate with Mercy Education and spell out expectations during a crisis and proactive measures school leadership can take. The Sisters of the Mercy and their sponsored schools have dealt with crisis in 7 general areas: church issues, school closings, racism, abuse, gender identity, employment issues, and violence. Church issues. These can be major challenges. Let me give you a somewhat recent example in the Archdiocese of Omaha, Nebraska, where the Sisters of Mercy sponsor an all-girls high school. In August of that year, Archbishop George Lucas issued a new gender identity policy for Catholic schools in which all students, parents, guardians, employees, and volunteers would have been required to act toward a person in accordance with his or her biological sex at birth. Students would have been required to use bathrooms and locker rooms that correspond with their biological sex and would not have been permitted to attend school-sponsored dances with the date of the same sex. In addition, students' eligibility to participate in sports would have been based on their biological sex. Under the proposed guidelines, failure to abide by the policy could result in possible termination for employees and possible dismissal for the student. The policy received so much criticism that the Archbishop delayed implementation, and after listening to feedback and questions from Catholic school administrators and members of school communities, delayed the implementation of the policy. Several religious order high schools, including Mercy High, said they would not adopt, citing a different governance structure from archdiocesan schools that allows them to make their own policies. To this date, that policy still has not been implemented. School closings. Last year, the Sisters of Mercy needed to close one of its sponsored schools in Long Island, New York, a nearly century-old all-girls high school. The school was experiencing declining enrollment, changing demographics, rising costs, increasing deficits, and the economic downswing. 275 students were enrolled in the school, which had a capacity for 500 students. Last year's freshman class was 37 students. And to complicate matters, some alums created a coalition to try and fight the closing in court. Recently, we had some racial issues at some of our schools. In one instance, graffiti was found in a girls' bathroom, which contained a racial slur. In response, students gathered in support of each other and against the racist threat. The gathering was described as a peaceful rally in solidarity against the hateful messages. Abuse. Most often, abuse issues come to you as a big surprise. This is one of the key areas where schools really need to have policies and procedures in place and really need to follow them. Whether it is someone employed at your school, is a student at your school, or a coach, volunteer, or vendor, this is an extremely sensitive issue because you are dealing with personal reputations, not to mention your school's reputation. Abuse issues always need legal counsel and communication counsel. This type of issue can be current or from the past, depending on the statutes of limitation. And all communications around this topic are bound by the policies and procedures of the school. What you are holding as the leader or communications professional is extremely confidential. When inquiries come from the media, you need to be prepared with statements. I will talk more about this later in the presentation. But public statements should be based on knowledge and fact, not speculation. Stay within the bounds of law and ethics regarding privacy, confidentiality, and presumption of guilt or innocence. And all statements should be characterized by protection of the vulnerable, outreach to the alleged victim and family, care for the alleged perpetrator, and assistance to effective community, ministry, family, and friends. And as much as possible, school community members should learn of publicly emerging abuse situations internally rather than from the news. Employment issues can also be challenging for ministries, whether it is someone trying to sue the school or making accusations or potential strike issues for schools that may have unions. The key with employment issues is that they are personnel issues and need to remain confidential also because they involve people's reputations. Most times in these incidents, you need legal counsel to help guide you. Violence. In these turbulent times, unfortunately, violence has become part of our everyday lives. A disgruntled parent or employee can make threats to your school, and you need to be prepared in terms of safety measures and communications. And now I'll talk about some communication case studies. One of our most difficult crises that I experienced was at a sponsored elementary school where the director of religious education, an integral person in the school community, was in a same-sex marriage. Several parents at the school discovered the marriage and reported it to the Archbishop of the diocese, who then contacted the school principal. The crisis attracted national attention for several months. I will use this as a communication case study today and speak about it from the perspective of the school and their use of communication vehicles. We learned many lessons from this challenging communication situation. And also keep in mind that this happened prior to the formation of Mercy Education. So the school was dealing directly with the Sisters of Mercy and their Mid-Atlantic community leadership team. Face-to-face meetings were critical since they are the most effective means of communication. Initially, our president met with the school principal, the president of the board, the representative on the then sponsor council, the director of sponsored ministries, and myself, the director of communications. She also had a meeting with the director of religious education in the early stages as the crisis began to unfold. Our president also met with one of the parents who reported it to the archdiocese, and our lawyers were also made aware of the situation. The school contracted with a crisis communication consultant, and I worked with the principal throughout the first few months of the crisis. Once the issue hit the public forum, which it did in full force, we had to start paying attention to social media and the secular media. We had a constant flow for months of emails from parents and students. I responded to each and every email on behalf of the Sisters of Mercy. We also coordinated our communications to the media with the Director of Communications from the diocese, and we kept local sisters aware of the situation through emails and a community meeting. It was an extremely painful and challenging time for the school community, the Sisters of Mercy, and our leadership team, to say the least. A few years later, the media frenzy has subsided, but the crisis initiated deep dialogue about church issues with the Sisters of Mercy, which still continue today. But back to the key forms of communication during that critical time: face-to-face meetings whenever possible, social media, and response emails. As you can imagine, there is much more that can be said, but it was a true learning experience. Finally, I would like to give you some information about my communication learnings from these various situations. At the first 2 school closings, I learned some powerful lessons. At the first school closing, we learned something very simple: the importance of timing and checking the weather. Because of the gravity of the situation, the school administration wanted to send a printed letter rather than an email to all the current parents, informing them that the school was going to close the next academic year. They planned to inform the teachers and staff at an in-person meeting after school. The letter to parents announcing an in-person meeting were mailed at the post office that same morning. There was a major snowstorm, and despite the saying, neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night keeps a postal worker away, we learned that that is not true. The Postal Service cancels mail delivery due to extreme weather, so the parents received the letter 2 days late. Then the planned parent meeting had to be canceled because of the snow. So imagine how angry the parents were, and chaos ensued. Also, at that same school closing, we learned the hard way that social media is the primary news source, especially among students. While teachers and staff were being informed of the closing in person at a staff meeting, somehow students got wind of the announcement. They were immediately on their cell phones and social media, informing other students and parents. It was not a good situation, but a lesson learned. Whenever a crisis ensues, the very first place I go is either to Facebook or other social media, just to see how the schools mention and what people are saying. So here are 9 ways for you to show grace under fire. You can use these ways to think about what to do when a crisis occurs. They are things that I've learned throughout the years. And these measures, I think, will help you stay focused, respond compassionately, and to think clearly. Number 1, and this first point is critical. Every school needs to have policies, procedures, crisis plans, and a process in place to deal with crisis. The Sisters of Mercy have a crisis plan that includes certain protocols that we follow, such as being proactive and having open communications with the media as much as possible. All official external communications to media needs to be approved by our Institute leadership team. Mercy Education also has separate mission-based communication guidelines and a specific information flow during a crisis. Often we prepare statements in preparation for the media, and many of our statements are never used, but we prepare them just in case we get a call from a reporter, so we are always ready to respond. I will give you an example later in this presentation. Number 2, work closely with your communications person or hire a communication agency if needed. Your administrator really needs to work closely with your communication person if you have one. They can screen all calls from the media. And as soon as you know about a situation, you should meet with them to give them background and a chance to ask questions so they are appropriately informed. You also should have a communication consultant to work with in case of a major crisis. It's best to have someone identified before a crisis hits so they will not need to play major catch up to get to know your school or culture. When the Sisters of Mercy use an outside communication company, the consultant and our director of communications work together on the crisis under the direction of the Institute leadership team. Sometimes, if a school does not have a communications person, they will consult with Lauren Albright Tyrell, the Mercy Education Communications Manager, who is a great resource to help in a crisis situation. As anyone who has worked with Lauren knows, she is a delight and very well informed and professional, and during a crisis, she can be a great resource for you. Other times, we need to consult with legal counsel. Definitely if someone is suing us or there are allegations of abuse. Most times in crisis, you should inform your legal counsel, even if they are not needed at that moment, just so they can become knowledgeable about the situation in case a crisis intensifies. Number 4, know your audiences. When you have a crisis, you need to have a list of all potential audiences. For instance, at a school, you need to include the obvious ones: students, parents, board members, administration, teachers, staff, donors, alumni. But what about less obvious ones, such as prospective students, former teachers and staff, neighbors, feeder schools, vendors, other school administrators, other schools in the same network, church officials, insurance company, and local politicians. So always think beyond the obvious. Number 5, designate one spokesperson. This point is key. You do not want different voices talking to the media. It is very important to remember that a key person in a crisis is your receptionist or whoever answers the phone. Make sure that they know the correct person to receive calls and inquiries. They are often the first person I will go talk to once a crisis starts. Also, it is important to note that all communications must be approved by the school administration first, including statements and press releases. Even though a communications person may speak on behalf of the school, all these documents need to be approved before they are made public. And at times we have sent an internal communications to sisters to ask them not to talk to the media, but to refer all calls to our communications director, so the media hears the same message from the same person. At other times, we have requests from the media to speak directly with the president of the Sisters of Mercy, but we handle those situations on a case-by-case basis. And I mentioned this before, but I will mention it again. For us, this was probably one of the toughest lessons learned. Pay attention to social media. Even if you don't do it yourself, find someone who does, who can look the information up for you and let you know what's happening. And just a little thing about social media. This is kind of old news, but we stopped posting on Twitter, which is now known as X, because of the hateful speech that was often found in this forum. And we still to this day do not use Twitter, but we have retained our Twitter account. So no, we don't want anyone to try and use our account name. And we also have explored other forms of social media. So just that's kind of a side note. Number 7 is really important too, and it's concerns of safety and security. If you anticipate a challenging meeting regarding a crisis, you might want to contract extra security to handle parking or any crowd concerns. In the example I mentioned of the school closing, the school hired some security staff for the meeting just in case we needed it. There were some very angry parents there, but luckily we did not need it, but we had it just in case. We also wanted security for the students so they were not harassed by the media. The parent meeting was a closed meeting. You had to sign in to attend the meeting. The press was not invited, and the president of the community and I were both there at the parent meeting. But I did go talk to the media present at the school prior to the meeting and asked that they not come on school property. because school property is private property, and you can tell the media that they can't be there. And I also asked them not to approach parents, students, or faculty as they entered the school. But I did try to develop a relationship with them. I went out to their vans, I met with them, and I gave them the information they needed for their stories. And I scheduled interviews for them with some of the key players. So I made their job as easier as it could be. And number 8 is express concern and compassion. Whenever you're dealing in a crisis, make sure to express concern and compassion. Although you may be dealing with very difficult situations, you want the persons affected to know that you are empathetic. You may need to be careful how you express that concern, but make sure it's always part of any statement you give. And I'll give you, for instance, like you might not want to say that you want justice for an employee because their definition of justice and our definition of justice might be very different. So I would never use even that particular word because of the different connotations, but you do want to show your concern. My rule of thumb for statements is to make them short and sweet. I usually have a 3-sentence rule. Number 1, state and acknowledge the crisis in the first sentence. Number 2, define what you are going to do to resolve the problem. And number 3, express your concern and compassion. Let me give you a real life example. In an urban setting at one of our sponsored high schools in New York City, there was an incident on public transportation. 4 girls dressed in school uniforms were on the bus going home, and some other students from different schools got on the bus and started harassing the students. The parents reported the incident to the principal, and they also reported it to the media, and both of them contacted me. We did not have much information at the time, but we did prepare a statement stating what happened, what we were doing about the situation, and we expressed concern and compassion. Although we did not have all the information, we were still prepared to respond. And you can read the statement. I think a little of it is confused, but we showed them, we don't have all the information, we're gathering it, but the safety of our students is our primary concern. Also, please note a cardinal rule of crisis communication. Never, ever say no comment. If you do, it looks like you are hiding information. You can say, let me get back to you with that information, or let me check, but always try to give them a statement they can use. And in terms of a statement, in my opinion, the less you say, the better. If you say too much, the media can edit it and take it out of context. So make it short. And I often develop a holding statement. That's what this was. So as we learn about a situation, it's something you can give the media or people who are concerned until you have all the information there. And last but not least, pray, and pray some more when all else fails. The thing to remember about crises is they are often beyond our control. The best thing you can do is be prepared. But sometimes you have natural disasters or employment issues that you learn about after the fact, or situations that has happened even before you were at the school that you still need to handle. I hope that these learnings have helped you anticipate what you might do when a crisis happens. And now I'd like to open it up if others want to share or have any comments.